I want to thank you guys all again for joining. The intention of this webinar is to guide you through the operational changes and regulatory updates, which for the purpose of this webinar is going to be geared toward the adult use updates, and provide just direction for getting your business up to speed and staying compliant. This webinar is going to be a high-level overview of just a portion of the regulations. And I know that compliance isn't always riveting, but it's important. So hopefully you guys can all stay with me. Before we start, I do just want to note that you can submit any questions in the chat to the right, or send any questions to my email address at s.grande@vicentesederberg.com. And what we're going to do is send a Q&A sheet with a copy of the presentation next week so that I can answer any questions that you might have. So we're going to just jump right in and get started. Some of the things that we're going to go over today are operational changes and regulatory updates in regards to branding and advertising, packaging and labeling, testing, vendor and quality control samples, as well as just some additional changes to note. So we're going to start with branding and advertising, and we're going to go over what is permitted and what is not, the do's and don'ts. So to start, something just to note here is that the regulations no longer reference the term marketing. It is strictly just advertising. So what is advertising? The regulations define the term advertising as a form of marketing communication that employs a sponsored, non-personal message to sell or promote a marijuana establishment's brand, branded good, service, product, or idea. So what is permitted? Brand name sponsorship of a charitable, sporting, or similar event, so long as the following conditions are met. The sponsorship of the event is limited to your brand name. So what is your brand name, right? The commission and the regulations define a brand name as your registered trademark, your logo, a symbol, a motto, your selling message, a recognizable pattern of colors, or any other identifiable marker associated with your marijuana establishment. So again, sponsorship of the event is limited to your brand name. Also, the advertising at or in connection with the event is prohibited unless your audience is expected to be 21 years of age or older, as determined by a reliable current audience composition data. Also, what is permitted? Brand name sponsorship of a charitable, cultural, or similar event, both held and organized by the city or town in which you have a license to conduct business, as long as, again, the following conditions are met. It must be included in your positive impact plan. It is limited to your brand name. And again, you need that reliable current audience composition data that says that your audience is expected to be 21 years of age or older. And you must retain that audience composition data for at least 1 year or longer. And then we'll go into the changes of what is prohibited. So what you cannot do is brand sponsorship that is deemed to appeal to a person younger than 21. No advertising, including the use of brand name of in an improper nature. So what does that mean? So the use of language or similar images offensive to certain groups. What else is prohibited is advertising through the marketing of free promotional items, which would include any gifts, giveaways, discounts, point-based reward systems, loyalty programs, coupons, free or donated marijuana is prohibited. The exception of this, though, now is brand name takeaway bags. It's something that's new in the regulations that you can do. So what else is prohibited? Any advertising solely for the promotion of marijuana or marijuana products of any establishment's branded goods, including clothing, cups, drink holders, apparel, electronic equipment, any sporting equipment, novelty items, or similar portable promotional items. All right, some additional things that are permitted and not. So what is prohibited? The display of signs or other printed material advertising any brand or any kind of marijuana or marijuana product that is displayed on the exterior of your premises. What is permitted? So you can now utilize employee discounts as part of your operating policy and procedure for the prevention of diversion. All right, so what is different as far as warning statements go? So not a lot here. The warning statement is largely or has largely stayed the same, just a very small minor change. However, it's important to note this minor change because when you're advertising and you're providing warning statements, they have to be read exactly as it is outlined in the regulation. So anything in quotes has to be written exactly the same. So you still need to do, write, please consume responsibly in a conspicuous manner on the face of the advertisement. You still need 2 warnings in their entirety in a conspicuous manner on the face of the advertisement. So 2 of those warnings may be this product may cause impairment and may be habit forming. There may be health risks associated with consumption of this product. So those are all still the same. However, the difference in this warning statement is outlined in this PowerPoint. They just removed reference to the S at the end of the word edibles, as well as marijuana products. Again, a very minor adjustment. However, when you're providing warning statements on advertisements, it's extremely important that you, again, are writing it strictly as it is read from the regulations. So next, we're going to cover packaging and labeling and some of the updates. So the packaging and labeling for flour. So what they did was, this was still a labeling requirement, net weight or volume in US customary and metric units. However, they added that you have to list them on the label in that order. So you have to list in order net weight or volume in US customary and metric units. And that's going to be the same across the board for whether it be flour, whether it be edibles or concentrates. Another thing that they added was flour previously asked for the name and registration number of the marijuana cultivator that produced the marijuana. So they also want you to now include, in addition to the name and registration number, the telephone number and email address for the cultivator. So those 2 things have been added. And I would also just note that they removed reference to adding on the label the quantity of usable marijuana contained within the package. All right, so what's different for edibles? Again, like I said, the total net weight or volume in US customary and metric units listed in that order is going to be the same across the board. They also removed that reference to the quantity of usable marijuana contained within the product as measured in ounces. They removed the serving size of marijuana product in milligrams and added that you have to provide the number of servings within the marijuana product based on the limits provided for labeling and packaging for edibles and the specific weight in milligrams of each serving size. So I would just note that again, that it's in milligrams for each serving size of an edible. All right, packaging and labeling in reference to concentrates. Again, the same total net weight or volume in US customary and metric units listed in that order. If applicable, the number of servings in the product based on the limits provided and the specific weight in milligrams of a serving size. And they also added packaging and labeling requirements to marijuana vaporizer devices, which we're going to go over in a later slide. Tinctures, same thing. Just to repeat, again, total net weight or volume listed in that order, and then the number of servings and the product based on the limits. All right, so let's jump into marijuana vaporizer devices. So you have to, it's the identification of specific additives, which must include, but are not limited to, any additives identified on the FDA's inactive ingredient database. And they provide you in the regulations, the FDA inactive ingredient database. However, or if it's not available, you can use the database identified by the commission. All right, so some additional labeling requirements. If produced using only cannabis-derived terpenes, you have to include the following statement. This product was produced using only cannabis-derived terpenes. If not, this product was produced using terpenes derived from sources other than cannabis. And I just want to note here that these warning statements, again, are in quotations in the regulations, so they have to be written exactly as they are here. All right, so retailers offering marijuana vaporizer devices for sale to consumers must include signage at the point of sale that is legible and enlarged and contains the following statements. Marijuana vaporizer devices have been tested for vitamin E acetate and other contaminants with no adverse findings with this warning. So you have to include both of these statements, and again, written as they are from the regulations. You'll see here that I have bolded the warning, and that is because it is bolded in the regulations, so it has to be written exactly the same. All right, so the sale of disposable and reusable vaporizer pens and devices has to be accompanied by a product insert. So a physical insert to consumers that states, including capitalization and emphasis, the following statement. Marijuana vaporizer devices have been tested for vitamin E acetate and other contaminants with no adverse findings, including the warning. The product insert identifying the materials used in the vaporizer device's atomizer coil. A retailer must also make available the information regarding the processing technique or solvents used on the label. And retain all records of purchases from any product manufacturer or supplier of any ingredient, additive, device, component, or other part of other materials. And those records have to be made available to the commission upon request. All right, so what else is new? White labeling. So white labeling has been identified as a defined term in the regulations to mean to affix a product label that includes the branding, including the name and logo of a specific marijuana establishment licensee to a finished marijuana product that was previously produced and packaged by a product manufacturer, cultivator, microbusiness, or craft marijuana co-op for sale to consumers. So with white labeling, you just have to make sure that you're staying compliant with labeling packaging requirements. What you cannot do, so white labeling of any marijuana vaporizer devices is prohibited. And then if you are going to white label, you just have to develop policies and procedures, which retains all wholesale agreements. All right, some more updates as it pertains to packaging. So previously the regulations stated that packages had to be certified by a qualified third-party tamper or child-resistant packaging testing firm, right? So now they took away reference to third-party tamper testing firm, and now it is only certified by a qualified child-resistant packaging testing firm. So again, just something to note that it is no longer tamper-resistant, but only child-resistant. And what was added, you cannot use bright colors, cartoon characters, or other features designed to appeal to minors. All right, so what else is new? Packaging and labeling pre-approval. So the commission has a packaging and labeling pre-approval program where an application for pre-approval can be submitted at any time prior to the marijuana or marijuana product being sold at any time a substantive change is made to the packaging or the label. So what does this program include? So there's a $50 fee per product review, and the review is limited to the physical attribute and required warnings. So they're checking to see that it's legible, and they will not include a review of specific independent testing lab results. So as part of the program, what are they looking for? So what should be included in your submission? So you should include electronic files, which should be JPEG format with a minimum photo resolution of 640 by 480 and print resolution of 300 dpi. And any photograph that you submit to the commission must be against a white background. So what are they looking for here when they're doing the review? They want 2 images of the package, one depicting the front of the label and one depicting the back of the package. And then they want 1 image of each label requested for review. So next, we're going to go over testing. Reanalysis by a second independent testing lab. So this is important. If you choose to reanalyze the sample or a sample from the same batch, it must be submitted for reanalysis at the independent testing lab that provided the original failed result. If the sample passes all previously failed tests at the initial independent testing lab, samples from the same batch previously tested must be submitted to a second independent testing lab other than the initial testing lab for a second confirmatory test. So to be considered passing or safe for sale, the sample must have passed the second test at a second independent testing lab. And any product that fails the second test may not be sold, transferred, or otherwise dispensed to consumers without first being remediated. Otherwise, the establishment has to dispose of the product. So for remediation, if you choose to remediate, a new test sample has to be submitted to a licensed independent testing lab, which can include the initial independent testing lab for a full panel test. Any failing marijuana product may be remediated a maximum of 2 times, and any marijuana product that fails any test after the second remediation attempt, again, cannot be sold or dispensed to consumers, patients, licensees. The establishment has to dispose of the product and has to do so in compliance with waste regulations. All right, dosing limitations. So there's some new stuff here that was outlined in the regulations, and that would be that a marijuana product manufacturer may not prepare and a marijuana retailer may not deliver, sell, or otherwise distribute an edible with potency levels, and this is where the new regulations come into place, exceeding the following limits, which include the 10% variance, exceeding the following as tested by an independent marijuana testing facility. So for a single serving of an edible, it's now 5.5 milligrams of active THC, as where it was previously 5. And in a single package of multiple edibles to be eaten, swallowed, or ingested, not more than 20 servings, or, this is the difference, 110 milligrams of active THC. So again, they give you that 10% variance now. All right, so this is one of the new concepts provided in the regulations, which is vendor samples. So what is a vendor sample, right? A vendor sample is a sample of marijuana or marijuana product developed by a cultivator or a product manufacturer that is provided to a product manufacturer, a retailer, or a delivery operator to promote product awareness. So vendor samples, as it pertains to cultivators, can provide a vendor sample of flower to a product manufacturer or to a retailer. However, of course, if you're going to provide vendor samples, you have to create policies and procedures, which would need to include the methods to adequately track. How are you going to record? How are you going to document all of your vendor samples? So these are some things that you just want to keep in mind, is that when you do vendor samples, you have to create policies and procedures to align with that. And with vendor samples are going to be restrictions. So you can't consume on a licensed premises. You can't be sold to another licensee or to a consumer. It has to be tested in accordance with the testing requirements. The samples have to be transported in accordance with the transportation requirements. And of course, there'll be additional information. For example, vendor sample limits in a calendar month. So vendor sample limits for cultivators in a calendar month are strictly limited to 4 grams per strain of flower and no more than 7 strands of marijuana flower. You're also going to have to adhere to labeling requirements. So labeling requirements include that they have to be legible, firmly affixed labels on which the wording is no less than a certain amount of inches in size, containing specific information that vendor samples cannot be for resale. They have to include the name and registration number of the cultivator. The label has to include the quantity, net weight, type of flower contained within the package, etc. And again, you have to develop those policies and procedures if you want to do this. And then also you can do vendor samples for product manufacturers. So product manufacturers can provide a vendor sample of marijuana product to a retailer. Again, you're going to have to face the same things that a cultivator would. You have vendor sample restrictions, you have labeling requirements, and those are going to be the same labeling requirements and restrictions across the board. And then you have vendor sample limits, again, in 1 calendar month. And those sample limits are going to be 5 grams of marijuana concentrate or extract, including tinctures, 500 milligrams of edibles, whereby you can't exceed 5 milligrams according to the dosing limitations, and then 5 units of sale per cannabis product line and no more than 6 individual cannabis product lines. And then again, just to reiterate, you're going to have to adhere to policies and procedures, developing policies and procedures and following the restrictions and following the label requirements. And vendor samples as they pertain to retailers. So a retailer can receive a vendor sample of flower from a cultivator or a product manufacturer. Again, you're going to have to adhere to the restrictions. There are going to be vendor sample limits to employees in a calendar month. So 4 grams per strain, no more than 7, 5 grams of concentrate or extract, 500 milligrams of edibles, again, where the serving size of each individual sample does not exceed 5 milligrams, and then the 5 units of sale per product lines and no more than 6 individual product lines. So with vendor samples as they pertain to retailers, you're going to have to adhere to record keeping requirements. So you'll have to record specific information as well as, again, develop policies and procedures. And vendor samples provided to an employee must be entered into Metrc and counted against the employee's daily purchase limit, if applicable. All right, so next, another new concept, quality control samples. So quality control sample, again, as defined in the regulations, is a sample of marijuana or marijuana product developed by a cultivator or a product manufacturer, a micro business, or a craft marijuana co-op that is provided internally to employees for the purpose of ensuring product quality and making determinations about whether to sell the product. So with quality control samples, of course, you're going to have those restrictions. You're going to have to develop those policies and procedures. You're going to have label requirements. You're going to have record keeping requirements. And of course, the limitations. Again, those limitations are in a calendar month. So quality control samples as it pertains to cultivators is going to be 4 grams per strain of flower and no more than 7 strains of flower. And just to note that any sample provided by a cultivator has to be assigned in Metrc or entered into Metrc. And then you also have quality control samples for product manufacturers. So a product manufacturer can provide a quality control sample of product to its employees, again, for the purpose of ensuring product quality and determining whether to make the product available to sell. And again, you're going to have to follow those restrictions. You're going to have to follow labeling requirements. So some labeling requirements will include a statement on the label that says quality control sample is not for resale. You'll have to include the name and registration number of the product manufacturer, the quantity, net weight, type of marijuana flower contained within the package, and some additional information so that it is traceable in Metrc. And again, just to note, developing policies and procedures. I would also note too, let me go back here once more for quality control samples, that upon providing a quality control sample to an employee, you have to record the reduction in quantity of the total weight or item count under the unique identifier. You have to record the date and time that the quality control sample was provided to your employee. You have to record the agent registration number of the employee receiving the quality control sample, as well as the name of the employee as it appears on their agent registration card. So just some additional things to keep in mind. All right, so these are now some additional takeaways from the regulations that pertain to retailers, cultivators, and product manufacturers that we just found to be important to note. So important to note that there is a new definition for the term vault. So what is a vault? The regulations define vault as a secured, limited access storage room within the establishment that is outfitted with adequate security features for the purpose of storing marijuana or cash. And they note that a vault must be adequately sized to store inventory that is not being actively handled for purposes of dispensing, packaging, process, or transportation. They also made an update to information on limited access areas, whereby they now say that an establishment conducting an operation under multiple licenses at one facility that overlaps in shared hallways and access points, provided that the operations under each license type are segregated and an agent has access only to the areas where activities are conducted pursuant to the license under which the agent is registered. So that's to say that when you have multiple licenses under one facility that has a shared hallway, that hallway doesn't necessarily have to be a limited access area so long as you're not commingling in that area. Some additional takeaways. So there is an addition to incident reporting. So the incident reportings are all the same. They just added that you must report any significant motor vehicle crash that occurs while transporting or delivering marijuana product and would require the filing of a motor vehicle crash operator report. That's something important to note. There's also been an adjustment to diversity plan, where diversity plans now identify promoting equality among people of color. So they took out the reference here to minors, and they specifically said to promote equity among people of color, particularly Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, and Indigenous people, women, veterans, persons with disabilities, and LGBTQ plus people. So they removed reference to, again, minorities or all gender identities and sexual orientations. They also made an update to consumer education materials. So you want to make sure that you're updating your consumer education materials as well. So this is already included, the facts regarding substance use disorder. So it previously said that you have to include facts regarding substance abuse disorder. So they took out that reference to abuse and replaced it with use disorder. So again, took out anything regarding abuse and inserted the word use. So include facts regarding substance use disorder, signs and symptoms, as well as referral information for substance use disorder treatment programs. And then they also added what I have bolded here and the telephone number for the Massachusetts Substance Use Helpline. So just something important to note. Also some additional takeaways here for agent registration cards. So an agent registration card must be valid for 1 year from the date of issue and then renewed on a tri-annual basis. They also included, so you'll have to update your written operating policies and procedures, possibly your employee handbook, to include information regarding your code of ethics, your whistleblower policy, and a policy which notifies individuals with disabilities of their rights, or a comparable link that includes provisions prohibiting discrimination and providing reasonable accommodations. So there's a lot of updating your policies here. Another additional takeaway is advanced contactless order fulfillment. So a retailer can allow for advanced contactless ordering of marijuana products by telephone, website, or a third-party platform, which should be made available for inspection prior to commencing operations or upon request. So all orders must be between the consumer and the registered marijuana agent. Your order is limited to the consumer who placed the order if you're going to do the advanced contactless order fulfillment. The physical unit for storage must be bolted or affixed to the premises, and orders placed in advance cannot be retained in the physical unit overnight or outside of business hours. Again, you'll need a written operations plan, which has to be submitted to the commission prior to partaking in advanced contactless order fulfillment. And that operations plan will include things like safe storage, identification of individuals seeking access to the premises, video surveillance, things like that. Some additional takeaways. So prior to commencing operations, a cultivator, so cultivator disclosures. So cultivation, processing, packaging must take place in a limited access area, not visible from a public place without the use of binoculars, aircrafts, or other optical aids. So the new regulations just add that marijuana is not visible if it cannot be reasonably identified. Also, prior to commencing operations, a cultivator must disclose all growing media and plant nutrients intended to be used during the cultivation process. Also, prior to commencing operations, in all instances, a cultivator must disclose all growing media and plant nutrients used for cultivation upon request. And then here's another interesting one for product manufacture and imprinting. So rather than imprinting the required symbol on a single serving of an edible, so maybe imprinting your symbol on a hard candy or a chew, a licensee can now individually wrap and mark, stamp, or otherwise imprint each individual wrapper, which is pretty helpful now. All right, so that covers, like I said, a high-level overview of the regulations. Of course, there are many more changes and updates that are outlined in the regulations, but this was a high-level overview, again, geared towards adult use. And again, if you have any questions, submit them into the chat. This is going to be left open for a little while so that you can submit your questions. If you think of questions after the fact, you could definitely reach out to me via email at s.grandy@vicentesederberg.com. And what we're going to do is compile all of the questions on an FAQ and send it on an FAQ sheet and send it with the slides and recordings sometime next week. And if you have any questions, again, this webinar, like I said, only covered a small portion of the regulations. So for more information, or if you need assistance updating your materials or your policies and procedures, you can feel free to contact myself or anybody at VS. I just want to reiterate that we're always here to help and ensure that you guys are staying compliant. And yeah, if you have any questions, just let us know. And I just want to say thank you guys again for attending. Talk to you soon.